So hey guys, Marge in Chains is the 21st episode of Season 4 of The Simpsons. The infamous episode, well, it wasn't infamous until last year because it supposedly predicts the future, dun dun dun. You guys know what I'm talking about, and that is all I'm commenting on it. The episode was, of course, directed by Jim Reardon, and it was written by Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein. It was first aired on May the 6th, 1993. The story, of course, follows Marge accidentally stealing from the Quickie Mart and having to face prison for it. It's full with Phil Hartman and a brand new setting for Marge, so let's dive deep into the plot of this thing. The episode begins with a Troy McClure segment called I Can't Believe They Invented It, watched by Homer. He advertises a new and super quiet and efficient juicer with the help of Dr. Nick. Okay then. Honestly, this is a great segment to open the episode. It's got a great performance from Phil Hartman, and it sets up a plot device at the same time. Homer is convinced and buys the juicer. In Japan, at the factory, a worker coughs into the package and spreads the Osaka flu into the parcel. A lot of Springfielders also buy the juicer, and one by one they all get the Osaka flu. This is the inciting incident, and it sets up the groundworks for the conflict to come with Marge. Bart pretends to be suffering from the flu to get out of school, and the mayor gives an address from holiday. Mr. Burns finds Homer in his germ-free protection pod, and people demand a cure from Hibbert and instead release some killer bees. And Flanders believes he's being punished by God for watching Married with Children. This part of the episode is decent. It sets up the Osaka flu quite well, but it's arguably a little redundant as the main conflict is with Marge. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is some good stuff here, but I feel like the writers could have just cut one or two of these segments to give us a little bit more time showing how the Simpsons family are dealing with this flu. Marge is overworked getting things for people and needs to go to the Quickie Mart to get supplies. Gotta say, I really love the visual here. Sometimes these sort of things put me off episodes, but this visual right here is so well done and represents effectively how Marge is overworked and overstressed. She pays for all of the items but doesn't pay for the bourbon and exits the store. The alarm beeps and Apu is immediately suspicious of Marge and clearly sees her as guilty. I'll be honest, this is one of the worst portrayals of Apu in my opinion. He just feels so vindictive and cruel. Sanjay finds the bourbon and the police show up in force to arrest Marge. This is our plot point 1 and brings us into the second act. Marge and Homer visit Lionel Hutz to represent her in court, but Hutz doesn't have a good relationship with Judge Snyder, and they've drawn Judge Snyder. Homer attempts to talk Apu into dropping the charges, but Apu is clearly thrilled to be prosecuting her and tells Homer it's policy to prosecute all shoplifters. Wiggum tells Quimby about Marge shoplifting, and Quimby decides it'd be a good subject matter for his speech and tells pretty much the whole town. Some more Springfielders begin to be hyperbolic with their experiences with Marge, and soon the whole town is gossiping about her and the upcoming trial. Marge visits the Flanders and is spied on by Maude in the bathroom, and I'd say this is a pinch point of sorts. I really feel sad for Marge in this moment, especially using the normally kind-spirited Maude in this scene. It really shows how the whole town has just turned on her and perceives her in a completely new light now she has been accused of this crime. The court hearing commences, and straight away this is our midpoint. It acts as the no return point for Marge and the story. The blue-haired lawyer is confident and brings in Helen to BS some stuff about Marge. Frink tries to even make the claim that Marge killed JFK. Hutch tries his best to interrogate Apu, but nearly slips up going back into his relapse, but he manages to resist that sweet bourbon and asks Apu to recall the colour of his tie. But Hutz wasn't wearing a tie at all. Back at the Simpsons house, Hutz is boldly claiming that Marge isn't going to go to prison and is thanked by everyone. The trial continues, but it looks like Hutz fell off the wagon and he came to court in his pants. He asks for a mistrial, but Judge Snyder asks for the verdict anyway, and Hutch tries his hand at forging, but it doesn't matter as Marge is sentenced guilty. This is our plot point 2 and sends us into the third act, aka our low point for Marge. Marge goes to prison and Homer and Marge have this emotional farewell. Marge is taken to her cell and meets Phillips, her roommate, and then Tattoo Annie, and is almost thankful she doesn't have to cook. At home, Homer tries to run the house, but he doesn't really succeed too well. Bart has a sucky lunch but gets to play with Nelson, and the family visit Marge, and Homer and Marge get some alone time. We then cut back to the bake sale, we cut to a bake sale, where Helen and Maud are faced with none of Marge's marshmallow squares, and being $15 short of buying a statue of Lincoln, so they're forced to buy a statue of Carter instead. Riots and chaos break out in the streets, all because of none of those damn marshmallow squares. I guess this is the climax. I mean, this effectively is where Marge kind of wins and the antagonists lose. I mean, it's tricky because the second half of this episode is a bit of a mess, I'm not gonna lie. Marge is released from prison and is welcomed back by the whole town and is also given her own statue. Well, it's Carter, but they tried. Nice resolution. Okay, like I said, the second half of the second act and the third act is just a giant mess. I don't know what this episode is really trying to say. Well, I do. I know what it's trying to say. It's trying to say that Marge is important to the town, but it feels like it's trying to express that in too many ways. We get the disaster at the Simpsons house, the Marshmallow Square disaster and riots. I just feel like they probably should have stuck with the stuff with Homer and the family. I get you need Marge to be forgiven by the town, but I don't know. It feels a little forced and a little rushed, and most importantly, it doesn't feel earned. Not that Marge had to earn forgiveness, but she doesn't even do anything to prove her innocence. It just kind of happens. They could have given us more at the prison. In fact, I think that could have been its own episode right there. This comes down to the amount of time that the writers have to work with. But the second half just feels bloated. And it's not like they have no time to spare, because this thing is littered with cutaways, flashbacks and dream sequences. Too many, in fact. Some of them work well. Hutz dreaming about a world without lawyers, for example. It doesn't really stop the flow, but Grandpa and the alligator, Homer serving a live fish to Marge, Bartina and the warden, all of these are just unneeded and really break the flow. In fact, I'm getting whiplash just thinking about it. Look, I think the plot of the first half is pretty well written, but the second half of this episode is just a giant mess. As soon as Hutz falls off the wagon, so did the episode. Hutz is a redeeming factor though. He is funny as hell. Let's look at the jokes. Hutz is the funniest character in this one. If you disagree, you're wrong. Humor is subjective, but Hutz being hilarious isn't subjective. He's had it in for me ever since I kinda ran over his dog. Well, replace the word kinda with the word repeatedly and the word dog with son. Jesus, this joke is so dark, but so funny. This might be one of my hands down favourite jokes in the entire series. I laugh every time I hear him explain this. Ooh, he's gonna win! Being tempted by the bourbon, the whole tie debacle, Hutz is just great in this one, there's no denying. He is a joke machine. Speaking of Phil Hartman's characters, we can't forget about Troy McClure. He's not as funny as Hutz in this one, but I still think his segment is pretty damn funny. Oh, and the Jimmy Carter statue, that one is a classic joke. There wasn't too many jokes in this one I disliked. Even most of the cutaways weren't unfunny, they just felt unnecessary. I kinda dislike the Tattoo Annie fold-in tattoo joke. I don't know, it feels a bit cheap. I think for the most part, the humour is great. Hutz really elevates it to another level. But even all that non-Hutz jokes are still well done, I just don't think all of them were well paced. Apu saying we're putting that bitch on ice was also pretty funny. And as mentioned, I think Apu is portrayed pretty poorly though. I think this episode kind of treats him badly. Let's look at his character. Yeah, so Apu, he's a bastard in this one. I think it would have been better if they gave us a reason as to why Apu was so cruel to Marge. Maybe he himself has fallen onto hard times. I don't know. In this portrayal, he's just so nasty. Marge, I think, gets an okay portrayal, but I don't really know what we learn from her character in this. She's also a little passive, I'm not gonna lie. She doesn't have much of a say in her court hearing. It's pretty much Hutz and others who are fighting that battle. I think the episode does demonstrate that Marge is extremely important to the Simpsons family and the town, but apart from that, it doesn't really have much to say about her character. We don't even get her overworking and stressed until about 7 minutes into the episode. Even when she goes to prison, we don't get her adapting much or putting up some sort of a fight. We just have her talk and mingle with Phillips and then meet her family. The prison setting serves no extra conflict for her character. I feel bad for Marge throughout this episode, that's for sure, but apart from that, I don't think Marge gets any significant arc or changes in any meaningful way. She earns the town's love just by being absent and doesn't actually earn it herself. We learn that Homer is incapable of running the family without Marge, but to be honest, I think we already knew that. I do think that farewell scene between Marge and Homer is touching and shows how much Homer loves Marge, but again, something that really didn't need to be demonstrated. We all know Homer loves Marge. Lionel Hutz though, that guy gets some pretty decent to amazing development. We get a better sense of who he is, not only that he's an incompetent lawyer, but we get a reason as to why. He's an alcoholic, a recovering one at that. He ran over the judge's son, repeatedly. Part of me wants to know more, but I also love the vagueness of this. It lets the audience fill in the gaps to what happened in this guy's life. I love Hutz in this episode, it's definitely one of his better appearances. The characters and their development is pretty surface level though. I don't think we get anything from this episode that challenges our view on certain characters, apart from maybe Apu, but I'd argue that was a disservice. Anyway, I think I'm done discussing this episode, so let's move on to the score. Okay, I think this episode is bad. And I hate to say it because god damn it, I love Hutz so much in this episode. He is amazing. But the sheer amount of cutaways, flashbacks, dream sequences, the way the story bounces around, the poor portrayal of Apu and the lack of meaningful arc for Marge just means that even Phil Hartman can't save this one. I like a lot of aspects of this episode, but as a whole it just feels like riding a roller coaster, and not a good one at that. Okay, so overall, and I feel that this score is fair, but harsh, I give Marge in Chains a solid 3 out of 10. I don't know, I just thought the actual story was too all over the place. Anyway, let's move on to The Wheel. So, the next episode that we will be reviewing is... Grandpa versus Sexual Inadequacy.